2021 already. We are more than halfway through the year, and wow, what a wild and wonderful year it has been. It is closing. Hopefully, we're closing out on this world calamity. I know that the Delta variant has surfaced its ugly head. But today I'm really going to talk about a change in mindset as well as giving you some of the economic data and some of the direction that you need to be thinking about to make sure you are making those wise money decisions. All right, without further ado, let's talk about some of the economic indicators that we're going to cover today. And those are going to be vaccine updates, labor, tax changes, housing, stock market, inflation, Social Security, retirement, and finally, the economic map of version 7. So before we jump into some of the offsets, I really want to let me back up a little bit because I really want to talk about this mindset. For the first 20 years of my practice, it was really about asset protection. It was about being able to make sure that people were sustainable within their retirement plan. But once sustainability was achieved, meaning, and what does sustainability mean? It just simply means that you as an individual have enough between pension, Social Security, and an asset base that you will be able to live at the standard of living that you've been accustomed to without having to worry about running out of money or worry about long-term care or worry about any of these other horrible things that happen to us as we all get older. Now, those first 20 years in practice, it was a very different tax environment, and it was more draconian. It was aggressive by the government. The IRS was extremely aggressive back then, and it had turned. In other words, about 15 to 18 years ago, with actually, believe it or not, with the Clinton administration, it had turned into a nicer and friendlier IRS. They had really squelched a lot of the welfare programs, which put a lot of people back to work because they weren't giving out free handouts anymore. But remember, the taxes back then, there were capital gains taxes back then, just as there were now, but they didn't have preferential capital gains tax treatment. Now it's flipped back and forth. I was talking to somebody else about this the other day, and I said, it's been probably 6 or 7 times in my 37 years, almost 40 years, that they've switched this back and forth. And, who knows what it'll be in 4 years from now with a new administration. But right now, we're anticipating an overhaul of the capital gains tax rates into ordinary income tax rates. But back 20 years ago, we usually had a problem with people because the estate tax limit at that time was only $600,000. So a person could have $1 million 20 years ago, and they'd be paying $200,000 in estate tax on $1 million because they were $400,000 over the limit. So we had to work a lot of creative trusts and multi-generational transfer techniques. We would use 529s, restricted gifts, life insurance held outside the estate. There was a lot of different techniques that we would use back then. But honestly, for the last 15 to 18 years, we haven't had to worry about that very much. So one of the things I'm really trying to hit home with every client, every engagement, every public media, every radio show that I'm being invited on, every podcast that I am being invited on, every TV show that I'm being invited on, anywhere I can spread this message is that you need to start thinking differently. For 15 to 18 years, it was all about growth and accumulation. It was all about trying to get as big of a net worth for financial security reasons. And then when we would pass on, we really had virtually no taxes. I mean, estate tax limits went from $600,000 in the mid-2000s, and then they pumped up to a graduated schedule. It was almost $3 million. In the year 2010, there was zero estate tax. And then 2011, it started pumping up to where it got to $22 million per person for estate tax exemption in 2017. Now, that will be coming back to about $5 million in 2005. However, I think that it's going to change drastically even before then. Because if they eliminate the capital gains tax on death, or the capital gains step up on death, they eliminate 1031 exchanges. They put a limit on 1031 exchanges of $500,000. They've already changed the Secure Act, which compresses the period of time that you can inherit an IRA. So they've already accelerated the taxes on IRAs. So again, all these different things culminating together really result in the message to you that you need to start thinking differently. Once you reach financial sustainability, and you only know that if you are working with a true fiduciary advisor that is actually running the calculations. I don't want to hear any of this, oh, you look good, or you got enough money based upon the 4% rule. No, this all needs to be built out in a comprehensive mathematical model so we can look at variations of taxes, inflation, market adjustments, bad health, long-term care, all these different things. And if you're working with somebody like that and they come back to you and they say under every single condition that we can test and monitor, you're financially sustainable, then you need to start thinking differently. And when I say thinking differently, it's not now about growing your asset base. It's now about asset protection and multi-generational transference, meaning you have to make sure that if you are under this new environment where lawsuits are more aggressive, lawsuits are more punitive, lawsuits can take more assets from you, do you have the right asset protection structure? Secondly is multi-generational, meaning that if something happens to you, is the government just going to take back 50, 60, 70% of everything that you grew? So you have to start thinking through these things. So as we go through today's show, I really want you to start thinking through, do I need to spend more money? Can I spend more money? And maybe should I gift more? Should I use 529s or what's called a restricted gift trust? Should I use something like a life insurance policy with long-term care? Are these things that should be in your plan because of these major changes that are coming down the pike? So let's get into today's show, but I really want you to keep that top of mind because you're going to hear me every single week, every single instance, because I've seen these things pivot, these economic changes and governmental administrative issues change. And when people do not change their plans, they their families get destroyed. Financial security gets destroyed. So you've got to make sure you are changing with the times. And these financial advisors out there that haven't made major changes within this last pandemic, or those financial advisors that are not contacting people to say, hey, you need to have revised your trust because of the Secure Act, or you need to start thinking differently, then that is the problem, is because people have this false sense of security. They sit back and say, well, my financial advisor is taking care of it. No, they're not. It's your responsibility to make sure you understand what changes are coming and have somebody that is proactive, that is actually watching what's happening and making navigational changes. I don't care. You could have a cargo ship and your radar tells you that there's a hurricane coming. If you stay on the same pathway, you're going to sink your ship. You've got to make those navigational changes based upon the tides, the storms, and the winds. And the tides, the storms, and the winds right now are government administration, the economic environment, and tax laws. So let's get in with today. Let's vaccine tracker. Well, we're doing pretty well. We got up to 189 million. However, this Delta variant could provide a second wave within the pandemic. However, I do not believe, if you look back at the Spanish flu, there was a second, third, and fourth wave there. It was grossly ignored because people said, we're not going to stand for these shutdowns. We're not going to stay inside anymore. So the CDC is not releasing the accurate data, and I don't understand why. I mean, I could say it's political, but I don't know that for sure. Maybe they haven't culminated all the data yet, but I do know, as a fact, they have not released the data, but a lot of the rustle in the bushes is that this Delta variant can pass as easy as a common cold, but it is twice to 4 times as deadly as the original virus. This could pose a problem, and we may have to remap our econ map based upon more data that I'm researching on this Delta variant. Labor. Well, again, labor is an interesting thing right now because of the pandemic, the stimulus, the child care credit, the PPP, the extended unemployment benefits. There has just been so much money pumped into the economy as a free ride. I don't think we're seeing accuracy. within our true labor. So here's an example. New claims, 419,000 last week versus the 350,000 estimated. We have 9.2 million. That's kind of ridiculous. Unfilled jobs. Unemployment, we've got 12 million people unemployed, 9.5 million people on actual unemployment. And there's so there's a little typo there. It should be 9.5 million still on unemployment. We're still at 5% unemployment. So we have an issue with employment. And to me, I don't understand why there's this question. You go back in any history, in any period in time where there was extended benefits, government benefits. You look back in the 80s and the early 90s, that you could make more. And I know this for a fact because I had a lot of rental properties in New York. And at that time, you could be on welfare, Section 8, and food stamps. And you could be making $35,000 to $45,000 a year tax-free. You would have to repeat that. You'd have to get $60,000 to $70,000 a year to earn the same thing. So what do you think? I mean, we had just massive unemployment back then. And the people that I rented to, they didn't want to go to work. And they told me straight out, why should I go to work? I'm making more on free government aid. We have now created that situation within the pandemic and within all this stimulus that's been pushed out. Right now, there is 1 out of 4 Americans that are making more by staying home with all the stimulus payout. But thank goodness there's been 26 states that have approved ending excess unemployment. And you know what really disgusts me is this class action suit in Florida where they're suing the governor for withdrawing the extended unemployment benefits, and the unemployment office to these people has offered jobs. There's jobs available. They just refuse to take them, right? So I don't know if you've ever seen the Christmas Vacation, and I'm trying to think, it's National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, and it was with Chevy Chase. And there's a great scene in there where Uncle Eddie, and is played by Randy Quaid. He's talking to the wife. Chevy Chase is talking to the wife and says, "So has Uncle Eddie found any work?" Now he's been unemployed for like 10 years, right? And the wife says, "No, he's holding out for upper management." This reminds me of what's going on right now. Really? I'm sorry. I would dig ditches. I would deliver food. If I had to put food on my table for my family, I don't care what I have to do. You do what you got to do, right? Not just put your hand out and expect the government to take care of you. What was that Kennedy said? Ask not what your government can do for you, but what you can do for your government. Yeah. So anyway, inflation, supply line shortages. Hey, by the way, that shows you I'm not party lines here. It's not Republican or Democrat. You know, Kennedy was Democrat, but then again, when Reagan was in office, welfare was rampant, and then, Clinton helped that. So it doesn't matter what your Republican Democratic belief is, it's what's going on in that time. So inflation really is based upon supply line shortages. Right now we have this massive stoppage in the supply line, and it's causing this, basically it's a temporary, what I'm referring to as flash inflation, and it's creating disruption in the actual economic recovery of the pandemic. I mean, right now there's close to $4 trillion sitting on the sidelines. People want to go spend money, but they can't go spend money because some things you just can't even buy. So look at what's happening now with lumber, though. Lumber, just because it went up 1,100% in the first 2 quarters of 2021. But as this Fortune article says, the historic lumber bubble is over. Prices falling 68% from peak. So we're on some recovery. But if we look at what happened with GDP, the first quarter, the Q2 2021, it was a 6.1% increase versus a 6.5% estimated increase. But there's still a supply chain disruption. Had this disruption not happened, and remember what happened is we had the major fire in the chip manufacturers in the East Asia, right? Then we had the ship that stalled the Suez Canal for weeks. Now we have the labor shortage that doesn't want to deliver some of the goods and services, but we also have a massive backup. So in a little research that I did, right now, a majority of the products for especially fabrics and clothing and chips, they're coming into the LA port. Los Angeles port. And normally there's about 2,000 containers a day that come into that port that are distributed. Well, right now they keep backing up for a number of different reasons. One is the Vietnam and Malaysia have gone on an additional shutdown because of the spread of the virus. But when these containers come off the ships are actually being able to deliver the containers with goods and service or goods and products. But what happens is they come off the ship and then they put them on these truck trailers or 18-wheel. They're just a frame with wheels. Well, there's a massive shortage of these trail wheels because of the backup. And right now there's over 24,000. This is just incredible. I can't even imagine this, but 24,000 containers that are backed up at the Port of LA. The Port of LA Authority says that this could be 6 to 9 months where we're going to see this backup before they're going to be able to get these products and services out. I mean, we tried to order a couch and they told us it could be 12 up to 16 weeks before we even get a couch delivered. So again, this inflation is really based upon short-term fundamentals that are not sustainable. Now, let's get back into what I started today's show with, which is that middle class tax. One of the big tax changes that we're looking at is this proposed estate tax. And Bernie Sanders wants no estate tax limit. Senator Warren wants $1 million. Biden says $3.5 million. I think we're going to fall somewhere in that construct of estate tax. But estate tax is just one of the taxes. You still have capital gains tax. You have tax on, you have state estate tax. You have state capital gains tax. So a lot of what I'm telling you is also based upon the state itself. So this is why I said, if I go back to my first 20 years in practice, I remember the days where we would compute a tax on a IRA if you lived in the city of New York. And it could be as high as 68 to 75%. So the true intent of this, I really think, is that these tax laws that are coming up, it's to avoid the inference that they're going to assess an estate tax to the middle class. So what they're doing is they're just rephrasing it, like the politicians. And again, I don't care whether you're Democrat or Republican or alien. It's all about who wants to stay in power and how they manipulate the tax system to be able to do that. Because right now, there's a $22 million estate tax limit, soon to go back to 5, maybe less. But that's not where they're going to hit people in the belt. They're going to hit them by taxing capital gains, real estate, untaxed gains on real estate, and IRAs when you pass away. And that is going to affect the middle class. No matter what they say as far as, oh, we're only going to go after the wealthy, the billionaires. I'm sorry, I disagree with that. Always have. Because you're looking at a guy here that's actually physically doing the physical tax returns for hundreds of clients. And I can tell you, every single iteration of government says that, but what they really do is they go after the easiest target. The easiest target are those people between 1 million and 20 million. Why? They can't afford expensive representation in front of the IRS. So they have to bow down and just pay the IRS whatever they want to bilk out of them. And that's where we get into the new IRS. Well, I think for a period of time there, at least 10 to 15 years, I think that the IRS was easier, friendlier. But the IRS has gone through some tough times, and I won't take that away from them. They lost 20,000 employees to retirement or layoffs or whatever it was, and there was a hiring freeze. That was a political strategy, but it backfired because it made those people that work for the IRS stressed out. And so we've seen it, just the aggressiveness of the audits. And so now what's happening is the new IRS, there's already $5 billion that has been budgeted towards these new wealth squads to go after people. They say it's actually to go after people that are billionaires that are avoiding paying taxes, but we know how that works. They're going to train IRS agents by auditing people randomly and seeing what they can get. And the old statistics were that an IRS agent that audits has to get at least $150 an hour. And if they get more than that, they might get a promotion. So there's an incentive for those IRS agents. So again, right now we're anticipating audits to probably double, if not triple. So it's not just a matter of good, solid tax planning. It's also defensive planning. So making sure that what you're doing on your tax returns is going to hold water with the IRS, right? So we're anticipating 2 to 4 times as many audits. They're going to hopefully increase their technology because their technology is like 1990s. And we're also making sure that when the IRS does audit somebody, that there are legitimate compromises that we can make with the IRS. And again, you have to know what those compromises are. So housing, let's jump into that for a second. We already talked about the historical lumber bubble is over, but that has a lot to do with what's going on with the housing. And if you look, we know that housing right now is grossly, from May to June, new home housing starts have actually gone back to the pre-pandemic numbers. That means that housing is finally starting to level out. Now, I do believe that a lot of the builders, they saw this and they did not buy into, at least those builders that were around in the 2007 crash, they didn't buy into the build everything as fast as we can. They structured some of the, like Lennar and Pulte Homes and some of the bigger builders. They learned a lot from 2007. And so they structured a slower build out, which I thought was very smart. However, used houses, which have just gone through the ceiling, we also know that people were paying ridiculous prices. This is going to cause an artificial bubble. It cannot not happen. So, Social Security update. Well, right now, the breaking news is last week I reported to you that some of the OMB estimated that Social Security would increase about 4.5 to 4.7. There was actually a new news release that they're now anticipating it, Social Security increasing for 2021 as high as 6.5%. Now remember, the highest ever increase in Social Security was in 2009, and that is because, remember, 2007, 2008, we had a massive recession. And so the recovery in 2009 was like what we're seeing now, not to the extent, but it was like it happened because you're going from the bottom to, so it's easy to jump up a high percentage when you push it all the way down to the bottom. It's kind of like a spring. The further you push that down, the faster it's going to recover. And so in 2009, we saw that with 5.8%. And we could see as high as 7 or 8% in a Social Security increase in 2021 based upon this continual supply chain disruption. But right now, the estimate stands at 6.5%. So the Roaring 20s playbook, you've heard me say this since March, we are living history over again. If we look back at what happened in the 20s, virus hits the world, right? Millions died. They didn't have vaccines. They didn't have the kind of technology we have today. Massive lockdown, right? Same with us. Pandemic fatigue hits. Same with us right now. Spending spree hits. Now, we saw some of that spending spree in March and April. But then when the supply chain got disrupted even more, again because of the chip fire, the Suez Canal, now we've got this backup, we've got a resurgence and other countries shutting down. So there's this supply chain disruption. So we're not anywhere close to being through with the spending spree. Now, when that spending spree runs out, that now becomes a habit with people. We know how habits work with sleep, with alcohol, with food, with spending, with gambling. People, majority of people are going to continue to spend. When they don't have the cash to spend, because either their government stimulus ran out or they had other cash stashed aside from what they didn't spend during the pandemic, they start going into debt. Now, we're not there yet. We started seeing some debt increase per capita, but nowhere close to being of concern yet. Now, when the debt increased back in the 1920s, we had a stock market back then that was unregulated. There was no SEC. There was no Investors Act. There was none of these things back then that we have now. We also didn't have a banking system with FDIC. There was no Social Security. There was no welfare system. It was very different. So when people say that we could see something in our environment today that was as bad as the major stock market crash back then, I disagree with that. Not so much that I believe that the market could crash 50 to 75% at any time. The NASDAQ did. It took 15 years to recover. It happened in 29. It took 15 years to recover. What I'm talking about is the mass soup lines and poverty and homeless and et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot of government programs now that would prevent that. However, I want you to take note of one thing. In the 20s, there were more millionaires created per capita, because obviously the population has changed, than in any other time in history. We just saw it with the pandemic. Who increased their net worth more than anybody else? The top 1% wealthy people, right? Billionaires had the most growth in the last year to year and a half than they have at any other time in history. What that means is that you have to look at where money is flowing, where people are spending money, and just get ahead of it. Now, so far, the stock market this year is up annualized 29.14%. And you can see if you just go back to April, it's fluctuating back and forth, but it looks like we'll probably come into the end of this year somewhere between a 29 to up to a 40% rate of return. So one of the things I'm teaching people is recalculate your retirement. How much can you spend? How much could you spend if the market took a crash? What are you doing with taxes to help that? And also, what kind of financial plan are you using? Now, what I talk about is that most people use what I call the linear plan. And the reason is that the majority of the financial plans online, the majority of financial institutions, and the majority of financial advisors teach this method. This is where you plan out your life expectancy, how much you will need in expenses, and then you increase that each year based upon inflation. And what that does is when you figure out the maximum amount of income that you can take, it provides the least amount of income. Because it says that when you're age 90, 95, 100, you'll be spending the same amount as you are today with inflation. However, I'm going to bring some experience into this because closing on almost 4 decades, I can tell you that's not reality. What I teach is the bell curve. The bell curve says there's going to be a period in time where you do not have the mobility, the health, or the desire to travel as much, replace cars, do the activities. What I have personally found in 37 years is it happens right around age 78 to age 82. That means if you're in your 50s, 60s, or early 70s, why not spend a little more? Enjoy life. Enjoy what you can do with your money. However, that is not to the advantage of the financial institutions. See, the financial institutions don't want to teach you how to spend more. Why? It takes money out of their coffers. However, I believe in getting the most out of your money, whether that's paying less taxes, being able to spend more while you're alive and enjoy it. And that's why I think that everybody really needs to recalculate their retirement based upon the bell curve method versus the linear method. So what are the actions to take now? Well, you're going to see one little change if you've been watching me for any period of time. We had a change to a paradigm portfolio. And now what we're doing is we're starting to remodel that paradigm portfolio to what I refer to as a spend flow portfolio. A spend flow portfolio is now going to take a look at how life has changed after the pandemic. How many people will return to work? How many people are going to be traveling in a short period of time to get it out of their system and then return to norm? So again, these are the things that have to change as our environment around us changes. If it rains out, have an umbrella. If it's sunny out, you have sunscreen. No different than where your money is invested. So you also need to make sure that you are computing your risk-adjusted portfolio. Again, it's not all about gains. It's about risk-adjusted returns. And you've heard me talk about that with the high-rise jobs in the past, but it's making sure that you're not taking too much risk that you're not being properly rewarded for. Finally, refinance real estate. Get ready for real estate buying. Reverse mortgage is still a great idea with interest rates very low. Jerome Powell basically said there's no time in the near future that they're planning on raising interest rates, so now is the time to take advantage of the reverse mortgages. Hopefully you've taken my advice a year and a half ago, moving your intermediate and long-term bonds back to shorter terms or TIPS. And again, it's all right now about the concept and the focus of asset protection and tax reduction. So let's get into our final, our econ map, which has not really changed much. We've been on version 7 now for about 4 to 5 months. Because nothing dynamically, even the flash inflation and even the supply chain disruption has not changed as much. However, I will tell you that right now I am still anticipating a first quarter to second quarter pullback in the market next year, as well as that real estate adjustment. Hey, before we wrap it up today, if you have not joined our YouTube page, all you got to do is just go onto YouTube or Google YouTube, type in H&H Retirement on YouTube. You're going to see this screen, our main screen. And what you can do is just hit that red subscribe button in the top right. That'll let you know whenever we do videos, and it'll also allow you to get any kind of the updates to those videos. Or if you miss one of the shows, you can jump on and watch. Hey, before I sign off today, have a great weekend. We're going into August. Summer's half over. Hopefully you've gotten out of this massive heat wave this year. And if you have any questions on anything we talked about today, feel free to give our office a call. It's 844-702-1040. Again, 844-702-1040. And with that in mind, have a great week.